Pre Trip. Secret is to point or touch every part you're examining. If you're unable to touch it, at least point to it. Starting in front of the engine, first thing I'm going to check for any leaks on the ground, such as oil coolant or power steering that may be coming from any of the hoses. Second, open up the hood. Starting on the right side of the engine, getting anything that might be different or unique. First thing is the air compressor, which is mounted securely. Nuts and bolts are tight. The lines are tight. It's gear driven and it's not leaking any air. Next step, the reservoir. If it was at the add mark, you'd add fluid as needed. Checking power steering hoses, not cut, frayed, not leaking any fluid. Follow the hoses, takes you down here into the power steering pump, which is securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. It's gear driven and it's not leaking any fluid. I check all the hoses on this side, make sure they're not leaking. I checked the coolant reservoir. It has a sight glass. I can see it is pink. If the engine wasn't hot, didn't have a sight glass, I can remove the cap, stick my finger down in until I touch fluid. Working my way down. I checked the oil. If it was the add mark, I'd add a gallon, which would be right in here. Working my way down. Alternator, securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. The wire is tight with their nut. The belt is not cracked or frayed. Proper tension, 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch play. Working my way down. Water pump, which is securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. The lines are tight. It's not leaking any coolant. And it's also belt driven. Steering gearbox, securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. It's not leaking. I check the pinion arm, the drag link, and the steering arm. Make sure they're secured onto the ball joints with their castle nuts and their quarter pins. I check the front spring hanger and the rear spring hanger. Make sure they're not cracked. Make sure the nuts and bolts are secure. U-bolts, nuts and bolts are secure. And the bushings are good. I check the shock absorber. Make sure it's securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. Bushing's good and it's not leaking any oil. I check the leaf springs. Make sure it's not cracked, shifted, or missing. Started on the inside, working my way out, checking 5 parts of your brake system. Brake hose, not cut, frayed, not leaking any air. Brake chamber, securely mounted. Nuts tight, it's not dented, not leaking any air. Clamp around it is secure and not missing. I check the slack adjuster and the push rod that goes inside. With the wheels chock, brakes release, shouldn't pull more than 1 inch. With the brakes applied, not to be less than 90 degrees. The push rod is not bent. The lock nut is tight. It has a clevis pin with a quarter pin on the end right here. Where it's covered or not, you're still checking the brake lining. The brake lining, which is the shoes or the pads that goes up against the brake drum, is not worn dangerously thin, and it has no grease or oil on it. The brake drum, I can actually see from out here, it's not cracked or broken with no loose or missing nuts, bolts, or springs laying at the bottom of it. Starting on top of the tire, working my way down. Tires must have at least 4 30-seconds, even wear all the way across in every major groove. Up here, on steer tires, no recaps. The outer and inner sidewalls, no cuts or bulges. The rims, no bends, breaks, or welds other than factory. The valve stem is centered with a metal cap. Here I can check with the air pressure gauge, or for a steer tire, visually inspect for lower flat. The lug nuts, make sure there are none missing. Looseness be indicated by rust or shiny spots, or cracks that would be radiating from the bowl holes. The outer and the inner wheel hub seals are not leaking. These are packed wheel bearing seals, so leaks would be indicated by a spray pattern on the tire or a puddle laying down at the bottom of the rim. First thing I'm going to check is my safety equipment. I'm going to make sure that I have on the other side in that red box is 3 reflective triangles, but also make sure I have spare fuses for each amperage unless it's circuit breakers, and this is a circuit breaker system. The next step, I'm going to check fire extinguisher is properly rated and fully charged.
Go ahead.
Okay, make sure the seat belt is adjustable and it does latch. Now I'm going to do a safe start. Make sure it's in neutral. Clutch depress. Start the engine up. First thing, since this is ABS, make sure the ABS light did come on and go off. Some vehicles it won't go out unless it's moving. Next step, oil pressure gauge. Should be between 20 to 40 psi. Check the coolant, should rise to normal but not overheat. The volt gauge should show a charge. I'm going to check, make sure my dashboard is illuminated. I'm going to check my left turn signal indicator, my right turn signal indicator, my 4-way flashing indicators, and I'm also going to check my high beam indicators, make sure they're all working. I'm going to check the tach, make sure it's working by revving the engine. I'm going to check my air pressure gauge. Should cut out at 120. It'll cut back in when the air pressure drops down to 100. I'm going to check my wipers, make sure they have proper tension against the windshield, the blade's not torn. I'm going to check washer fluid, make sure it squirts fluid onto the windshield. I want to check my windshield, make sure it's clean, not cracked or broken, with no illegal stickers or obstructions. I'm going to check my mirrors, make sure they're clean, they're not cracked or broken, and they are adjusted for me. I'm going to check heaters and defrosters, make sure the defrost works and flows heat onto the windshield. And I'm going to check the heater, make sure it works down below. I'm going to check steering play, leaning out, looking at the steer tire, wiggle it back and forth just enough to get the steering wheel tire to move. On a 20-inch wheel, I should have no more than 2 inches of free play. I'm going to check my city horn and my air horn, make sure they're both working. Now I'm going to go into the brake check. First is now leading me into my air brake check. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put it in gear, and I'm going to tug against the parking brakes for the trailer. Out means you're ready to get out, in means you're ready to go. So I release the parking brakes for the truck. Tug against the parking brakes for the trailer. Make sure they're holding the trailer behind. Next step, I'm going to reverse it. In means you're ready to get out means you're ready to go. So I'm checking the parking brakes for the truck. Tug against the parking brakes for the truck, make sure it's holding the truck behind. Next step, service brakes. I would pull forward 5 miles an hour. Hit the service brakes, see if it pulls from one side or the other, which would indicate a problem. Next step, with it in gear, Engine off. Both valves are pushed in to charge the system up. Remember to turn the key on so you can see lights appear on your dash. I'm going to time it for 1 minute. Once the air pressure gauge stabilizes, I'm stuck for static air loss. Should be no more than 3 psi air loss within a 1 minute period. Now with applied foot pressure, firm pressure onto the service brakes, which is right around 90, I'm going to time it for 1 minute, and there should be no more than a 4 psi air loss. This is where I'm going to wait and hold for the examiner until he tells me to move on. Since the key is on, I'm going to start pumping down the brakes. At 60 or above is when the low air warning light come on. Forget about the lights, forget about the gauge. Next step is to watch your spring brakes pop out, which is your emergency brakes. And that should occur between 20 to 45 psi. And they both have dynamited out. Next step is another safe start. Just make sure it's in neutral, clutch depressed. Start the engine back up. Now, at 1500 on attack, once the air pressure gauge reaches 85, it should take no more than 45 seconds for it to build from 85 to 100. At 120 or 125 on a dual air system, that's when the air compressor is going to cut out. When it drops down to 100, that's when the air compressor is going to cut in. This is how you get the vehicle to move after you've done your pre-trip, or after you came out of the skills yard to move on, get the vehicle to move. The next step is have the examiner get out and check my lights for me. So I'm going to tell him where to start at. I want him to start in front of the vehicle. I want to have him check cab identification lights, left turn signal, right turn signal, four ways, high beams and low beams. Also want to check the side cab and the side trailer lights, left turn signal, right turn signal, four-way, markers and clearance lights. I'll also want to have them check the rear of the tractor trailer, left, right, four-ways, brake lights, and clearance lights. But you're going to do it with the engine off. Make sure if you got your key off, your high beams does work and your turn signals work. Some vehicles won't work unless you have the key onto accessories. Now we have the examiner, I'll have the examiner get out and check the lights. And you're going to do it with the engine off for safety reasons only. Hey, since the examiner just got through checking the lights, I left my lights on, left my four-ways on, and I got the keys so nobody can get underneath and nobody can start the engine while I'm doing my vehicle inspection underneath. First thing I'm going to do is check my cab identification lights, including my turn signals and four-ways. I'm going to group these things together, make it a little faster. The lenses are clean, they're not cracked or broken. The proper color is amber in the front, red to the rear. They also serve as reflectors, and the lights are working. My headlights are clean, not cracked or broken, and they are working. I'm going to check my mirrors. Make sure it's securely mounted, nuts and bolts are tight. I'm going to check my door latch, my hinge. Make sure it's working correctly. I'm going to check my side lights, which serves as turn signals, four-ways, marking lights. Make sure they're working. Proper color is amber. Lenses are clean, not cracked or broken. They also serve as reflectors. I'm going to check the battery box. Make sure it's securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. There's no corrosions on the terminals. I'm going to check the fuel tank. Make sure the straps are securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. There's a rubber gasket in between the tank and the strap. Fuel cap lid is on tight, not leaking. And there's no leaks underneath the tank or coming from any of the fittings. I'm going to check the steps. Make sure it's securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. I'm working my way back. I'm going to check the exhaust system. Make sure it's securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. Any black soot would indicate a leak coming from any of the joints. I'm going to check my air hose. Make sure it's secured into the back of the tractor, plugged into the front of the trailer. The air hose is not cut, chafed, not leaking any air, it's not dangled or dragging against the truck. Check my electrical cord. Make sure it's plugged into the back of the tractor, plugged into the front of the trailer. It's not cut, chafed, should not be tangled or dragging against the truck. I'm going to check my frame. Make sure it's not cracked or broken, has no loose or missing parts, which would be your nuts and bolts. I'm going to check my drive shaft. Make sure it's securely mounted by the U-joints and it's not bent or twisted. Check my quarter fender. Make sure it's securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. Next step, big stupid truck. First thing I'm going to do is my brakes. Wait a minute, let me get the stick. Okay. First thing I'm going to check is the brake hose. Should not be cut, frayed, or leaking any air. Second step is the brake chamber. Hose is tight, chamber is not dented, leaking any air. Clamp around it is secure and not missing. On the back side of the chamber is your slack adjuster and push rod. So with the wheels chocked, brakes released shouldn't pull more than 1 inch, with the brakes applied not to be less than 90 degrees. The push rod should not be bent, lock nuts should be tight, and on the end with the clevis pin and a Carter pin. Brake lining should not be worn dangerously thin with no grease or oil on it. And brake drums should not be cracked or broken with no loose or missing nuts, bolts, or springs laying at the bottom of them. I'm going to check my front spring mount and my rear airbag mount. Make sure it's securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. I'm also going to check the U-bolts. Make sure it's securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. I'm going to check the torque rod. Make sure it's securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. Bushing's good. As well as the leaf spring should not be cracked, shifted, or missing. I'm going to check the shock absorber. Make sure it's securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. Bushing's good and it's not leaking any oil. And then in the rear, I'm going to check my airbag, make sure it's not cut and it's not leaking any air. Starting on top of the tire, working my way down. On drive tires, should have at least 2 seconds, even wear all the way across in every major groove. Back here you can have recaps. Both inner and outer sidewalls of both tires, no cuts or bulges. Rims, no bends, breaks, or welds other than factory. Check for any rocks or debris in between the duals. Make sure the tires are not touching. Valve stem should be centered with a metal cap on both tires. Here I could check with an air pressure gauge. If I didn't have one, I could thump the tires with a tire thumper. Lug nuts, none should be missing. If they were loose, indicated by rust or shiny spots or cracks radiating from the bolt holes. The outer and the inner wheel bearing seals not leaking. Leaking can be indicated by a spray pattern on the tire or a puddle laying down at the bottom of the rim. And I would check this axle the same way as I check the front axle. I would check my tail lights. They're red in the rear. They're all working, which is your turn signal, four-way flashers, brake lights, and tail lights. The lenses are clean, not cracked or broken, and they also serve as reflectors. My mud flap, securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. It's not damaged, which means it's not cut or torn. Just like you hook up to a trailer, I check to make sure that the locking jaw is around the kingpin. The kingpin is not cracked or bent, and there's no space in between the upper fifth wheel, which is your apron, and your lower fifth wheel, which is your assembly. The next step is check the skid plate, which is properly greased. There's no missing nuts and bolts. Some of them take pins. I check the platform, which connects the skid plate onto the frame of the truck. There's no missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked. Looseness be indicated by rust or shiny spots. I check the sliding fifth wheel. Make sure the pin is engaged. If air operated, which this is, check for any air leaks and proper clearance in between the rear drive tires and the landing limb. I check the release arm, make sure it's all the way in, which is in the proper position. I check the apron. It's not bent, dented, or broken. I check the header board. Make sure it's securely mounted by rivets and it's not damaged. The lights on top. The clearance lights, make sure they're working, including the lights down the side. Lenses are clean, not cracked or broken. Proper color is amber, and they also serve as reflectors. I got a proper amount of reflective tape down the sides. I check the landing gear. Make sure the leg's all the way up. The crank handle is secured. And the braces securely mounted by nuts and bolts. I check underneath the trailer for the frame and cross members, which should not be cracked, bent, or broken. And there should be no holes in the floor. I check my side trailer indicator light, which is turn signal four ways and marker lights. Make sure the lenses are clean, not cracked or broken, proper color amber. Serve as the reflectors and they're working. Thinking of big stupid truck again. First thing I'm going to check is the brake hose. It's not cut, frayed, leaking any air. This chamber, securely mounted, nuts tight, not dented, leaking any air, clamp around it, secure and not missing. And on the back side of it is your slack adjuster and push rod. So with the wheels chock, brakes released, shouldn't pull more than 1 inch. With the brakes applied, not to be less than 90 degrees. The push rod should not be bent, lock nuts tight with a clevis pin and a carter pin on the end of it. Brake lining, not worn dangerously thin with no grease or oil on it. And brake drum, as you can see on the other side, it's not cracked or broken with no missing nuts, bolts, or springs laying at the bottom of them. Your sliding tandem, the pin is secure and the handle's in secured. Pins are engaged. Front spring hanger, rear spring hanger, securely mounted by welds. Nuts and bolts are tight. Torque rod, securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. Bushing's good. Leaf springs not cracked, shifted, or missing. And the U-bolts, securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight. Starting on top of the tire, working my way down. Back here you can have recaps. Tires must have at least 2 30-seconds even wear across in every major groove. Inner and outer sidewalls of both tires, no cuts or bulges. Rims, no bends, breaks, or welds other than factory. Check for spacer. These are Dayton's. Make sure there's no rock debris in between the duals. The spacer ring is centered evenly, not cracked or broken. The valve stem on both tires centered with a metal cap. Back here you check with an air pressure gauge or with a tire thumper if you didn't have one. The rims, no bends, breaks, or welds other than factory. Lug nuts, make sure there are none missing. Looseness be indicated by rust or shiny spots or cracks radiate from the bowl holes. The outer and inner wheel seals not leaking. Leaking be indicated by a spray pattern on the tire or a puddle laying down at the bottom of the rim. If I couldn't see through the sight glass, I could remove the cap, sink my finger up to the first knuckle until I touch fluid. I will check this axle the same way as I check this axle. I check side marker light, make sure it's working. Red to the rear, clean, not cracked or broken. Also serve as reflectors. Mud flap, securely mounted. Nuts and bolts are tight and it's not damaged. Starting on top, working my way down. The clearance lights, they're working. Lenses are clean, not cracked or broken. Proper colors red to the rear, also serve as reflectors. The door should move up and down freely. It's got a good rubber seal going around the door. The cable's not cut, frayed, secured by a clevis pin and a carter pin. It's latched securely, and there's a good rubber seal going around the door. I check my tail lights, which is my turn signal, four-way flashers, brake lights and tail lights. They're all working. Lenses are clean, not cracked or broken. Proper color is red, and they serve as reflectors. My license plate light, make sure it's clean, not cracked or broken, the lenses, and it is working. My DOT bumper should be secured by welds. Nuts and bolts are tight. I got a proper amount of reflective tape in the back. And when I'm done, I would check the right side the same way as I check the left side.